My name is Claire Whitmore, and for 11 years I have made my living reading paper for a truth that people didn't want told. I'm a senior property claims adjuster. When a house burns or a roof caves in under a foot of wet snow, I'm the one who walks through the wreckage with a clipboard and a camera and decides what's real and what's been dressed up to look bigger than it is. People imagine that job is about sympathy. It isn't, not really. It's about paper. Every claim is just an argument written down. And in 11 years, I have learned that the argument with the better paper always wins. I did not know, on the ordinary Tuesday this story starts, that I was about to need that lesson inside my own family more than I had ever needed it at work. The envelope was certified. That's the detail I keep coming back to, because somebody paid extra money to make sure I signed for it personally. Inside was an invoice, typed and official looking, with a header that read Kessler's Table Special Event Services, and a single line beneath it, balance due $72,500. At the bottom, in blue ink, in handwriting I would have known anywhere, my former mother-in-law had written 4 words. Family settles its accounts. 4 months. That's how long it had been since my divorce from Evan Kessler was finalized. And 4 months, apparently, was exactly how long Diane Kessler needed to decide that hosting my own wedding reception at her family's event barn had never been a gift at all. It had been a loan. And now that I was no longer her son's wife, the loan had come due. Welcome back to Suspense Calm Stories, where the quietest person in the room is usually the one keeping the most careful file, and where a number, read out loud at exactly the right moment, can do more damage than any shouting match ever could. If you're the kind of person who believes proof matters more than volume, you're in the right place. Stay to the end, because the invoice isn't the twist. What I mailed back was, I didn't call a lawyer that first night. I did something quieter. I went to the hall closet, and from the top shelf, behind the winter coats, I took down a blue 3-ring binder I had been filling for 7 years without ever once planning to open it in anger. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea I never drank, and I started reading my own life back to myself in numbers. To understand why a fake invoice could rattle me at all, you have to understand Harmon Mills, the town I've lived in my whole life. It's small enough that everyone's insurance claims eventually cross my desk, and small enough that everyone's opinion of you follows you into the grocery store, whether you invited it or not. I built my name in this town one honest file at a time, one denied claim I could defend, and one approved claim I could stand behind. That kind of reputation takes a decade to build and about a week to lose. And I could already feel the week starting. I want to tell you who I was before any of this, because the version of me the town was about to hear about wasn't the real one. I grew up the daughter of an auto mechanic and a school cafeteria worker, in a house where the electric bill got real attention every February. I learned early that the people who survive are the ones who write things down, because memory is negotiable and a receipt is not. I put myself through a business degree at the regional college, took an entry-level claims job at 22, and worked my way up by being the adjuster nobody could argue with, because I never once showed up to a dispute without the documentation to end it. By 30, I owned a small brick house on Larkspur Street outright, in my own name. And I was proud of that house the way you're proud of anything you built, without asking permission from anyone. What I didn't understand back then was that the same instinct that made me good at my job, the quiet habit of keeping every record, filing every receipt, never mentioning the hours I put in for free, had a shadow side. I gave generously and silently, and I never once showed anyone the ledger I was keeping in my head, and eventually in that blue binder. I told myself that was grace. I believe that less now. I met Evan Kessler when his family's catering barn needed a claim processed after a walk-in freezer failed overnight and ruined 3 days of inventory. He was easy to like, warm in the way people are when they've never had to fight for anything, and utterly unable to sit still inside a problem for more than 5 minutes before someone else solved it for him. His mother, Diane, ran Kessler's table with her late husband, Holly's, for almost 30 years through droughts of business and lean seasons, and she had learned to count every dollar twice because there was rarely a second one waiting behind the first. I respected that discipline once. I still do, a little. But hardship does strange arithmetic on a person, and somewhere in those lean years, Diane stopped believing that anything given freely could stay free. In her mind, every dollar she ever spent on her children, or on anyone, was capital placed at interest, and love itself came with a due date she alone got to set. When Evan and I got engaged, Diane offered to host the wedding reception at the barn at what she called the family rate, and I was young enough and grateful enough to call it kindness. I understand now it was an acquisition. At the rehearsal dinner, wine glass in hand, she leaned in close and told me warmly that a Kessler wedding was an investment in the family's good name, and that a smart woman always finds a way to protect the family's investments. I laughed because I thought it was a toast. It wasn't a toast. It was terms and conditions, and I had just agreed to them without reading the fine print. Marriages rarely end over one large thing. Ours ended over a decade of small ones, and nearly every one of them had a dollar sign attached. Evan wasn't cruel. I want to be fair to him even now. He was gentle and funny and constitutionally unable to remain in a room with a problem in it. When the barn's walk-in freezer failed a second time, and the insurance settlement came in short of the real damage, I quietly covered the gap myself, $19,200, because I understood exactly how claims math worked and exactly how much had genuinely been lost, and I wasn't going to let Diane's business go under over a policy limit. When Evan's delivery truck loan went underwater in our 4th year, I paid it off, $14,750, and told myself that's what partners do. When his mother fell on the ice behind the barn, and the medical bills came in past what her plan covered, I wrote that check too, $11,400. When Holly's passed, and there wasn't enough set aside for the funeral, I quietly paid the difference, $5,900, because the man had never once been anything but kind to me. When his sister Paige got into culinary school and the family couldn't cover the second year's tuition, I paid that too, $8,300, because she used to sit with me in the walk-in during inventory counts and tell me about the restaurant she wanted to open someday. And when the barn's roof failed in a spring storm, and the claim I processed carefully, at arm's length, through a colleague, because I would never touch my own family's file, still left a gap between the payout and the real cost. I closed that gap too, $16,000, without a word to anyone. I never once thought of any of it as a loan. I thought of it as the ordinary arithmetic of loving people. But some old instinct from that house, with the February electric bill, made me log every figure anyway, date, amount, reason, into a binder I kept behind the winter coats and rarely opened. I couldn't have told you why I did it. I only knew that a woman raised to believe numbers were the only thing that never lied to you does not throw a receipt away, even one she never intends to use. It turned out to be the only thing that saved me. I didn't leave Evan in a single dramatic scene. There was no slammed door for the whole town to replay. What happened was quieter, and I think sadder. I woke up one ordinary morning at 36 and understood I had been the only adult managing our life for years, tired in a way that sleep had stopped fixing. The final straw was almost embarrassingly small. Evan let his mother talk him into moving $4,000 out of our joint savings to cover a shortfall at the barn without telling me first. And when I found out, he didn't see the problem at all. She needed it, he said, as if that settled every question that mattered. I filed for divorce cleanly, asked for nothing that wasn't already mine, kept the house on Larkspur that had always been in my name alone, and didn't touch a cent of the barn or the family business. I thought that was the end of it. Diane apparently thought it was the day her invoice finally came due. And before I go further, if the idea of a quiet person keeping perfect records is exactly the kind of story you come here for, hit subscribe now, because Suspense Calm Stories posts a new one of these every week, and I don't want you to miss what happens at that barn. The morning after the invoice arrived, I called an attorney, Renata Ford, who had handled my divorce, and I read her the whole thing, line by line. There was a pause, and then she laughed, which is not the sound you expect from a lawyer on the clock. "Claire," she said, "this isn't an invoice. It's a wish written on letterhead." She walked me through it plainly. Wedding costs paid during a marriage don't become a collectible debt to an in-law years later just because someone decides to type it up and mail it certified. Legally, she told me, it's nothing. Don't send a dime, and don't dignify it with a reply. I felt the first loosening in my chest since the envelope had landed. Then she added the part that tightened it right back up. Legally, it's nothing, she said. Socially, she's just handed the whole town a story, and stories don't care what the law says. She was right, and I'd already felt it by that Thursday at the grocery store, where two women near the produce stopped talking a half-second too late when they saw me coming. And I heard, on my way out, not quite quiet enough, that I'd taken that family for everything they had and walked away without looking back. That was the story now, walking around Harmon Mills wearing my face. Diane hadn't sent me a bill. She'd sent me a verdict and mailed copies to everyone I'd ever have to see again at the hardware store or the pharmacy counter. 9 days later, a second letter arrived, dressed up nicer than the first, typed on heavier paper, full of phrases like outstanding family obligation and good faith resolution, signed by Cole Hargrove, paralegal. Cole is Diane's nephew, a young man who files paperwork at a law office 2 counties over, and has spent his whole life wanting people to assume that makes him a lawyer. The letter threatened small claims court, then suggested, more gently, that the matter might instead be settled at the barn's 30th anniversary dinner that month, in front of family and longtime customers, where cooler heads might prevail. I read it twice and understood the actual plan. Diane wasn't going to sue me. She knew better. Cole's letter was a costume, dressed up to make the invoice look official enough that reasonable people would assume there had to be something behind it. And the anniversary dinner wasn't hospitality. It was the venue she'd chosen, because it was the one room where her weakness, a bill with no legal standing, didn't matter, and mine, a reputation I'd spent a decade building, did. Paige did the part her mother was too proud to do herself. Not loudly. In the small, deniable way a town like this understands. A vague post in the community group the whole church and half the customers use, praying for our family through a hard season. Some people take and never look back. Heartbreaking to watch, no names, because names were never necessary. By that evening, 3 people had texted me some version of everything okay. And one woman I barely knew sent her sympathies in a tone that made it very clear which version of the story she'd already believed. I sat with that message a long time, and I felt the old pull to defend myself in public, to write out the whole truth in one furious post and let the town read it. I actually started typing it. Then I heard my own voice, the one that steadied me through 11 years of disputed claims. I don't argue with people who want a fight. I show them the paper. Diane and Paige wanted noise, a shouting match the whole comment section could referee. That was never going to be my weapon. I deleted every word, closed the app, and went to the hall closet for the blue binder. I want to be honest about the choice I made that night, because it's the hinge of everything that came after. I could have matched Diane's whisper for whisper, turned the community group into a courtroom with no judge. That's exactly what the trap was built for. But 11 years of this work taught me something simpler. You don't beat someone by picking up their weapon. You beat them with yours. Diane's weapon was a story with no paper behind it. Mine had always been the opposite, dated, sourced, undeniable. So instead of defending myself, which sounds guilty no matter how true it is, I decided to account for myself, which sounds like nothing until you watch it done properly. I called Marcus Byen, my claims supervisor and a licensed CPA on the side, a man as allergic to exaggeration as I am, and asked him for one thing: a formal, itemized statement of every dollar I had paid on behalf of the Kessler family over 7 years, sourced, dated, and signed on his own letterhead. He asked, carefully, why. I told him someone had sent me a bill, so I was going to make sure the whole account was finally complete. He said he'd have it within the week. I spent that week the way I prepare for anything that matters, not with anger, with order. I spread 7 years of statements across my dining table under good light, the way I do for a client's shoebox of receipts, and I let myself add up, for the first time, the true cost of loving people who never once planned to pay it back. Freezer settlement gap, truck loan, medical bills, funeral costs, tuition, roof, each stack a small monument to a year. I decided love meant quietly covering the difference. Near the bottom of the binder, I found a single page I'd forgotten was there, older than the rest, the edges gone soft. It was the invoice from the freezer repair, the very first thing I'd ever paid for this family. And on the back, in Holly's blocky handwriting, was a line he must have written the year before his heart gave out. Keep every receipt, Claire. Someday somebody will try to tell you it never happened. I remembered the afternoon he wrote it, sitting with me at the Barnes office desk while I explained why the settlement had come in low. He'd looked at me for a long moment, this quiet man who saw more than he ever said aloud, and told me something I hadn't understood until years later. A claim is just an argument on paper, he said. Whoever has the better paper wins. I thought he was talking about my job. Sitting at my own dining table years later, I finally understood. He'd been warning me about his own wife. Marcus called 2 days after that with a voice pitched flat, in the particular way of a numbers person about to deliver a number that means more than it says. He'd run it 3 times, cross-referenced every statement against every cleared check. The total came to $75,550. I sat with the phone against my ear and did the arithmetic that actually mattered. Diane had billed me for $72,500. I had already paid this family $3,050 more than that. years before she ever wrote a word of it down. I'll come back to that dinner in just a minute, because it's exactly where this is heading. But first, tell me where you're watching this from tonight. These stories somehow always travel further than I expect, and I like knowing who's out there keeping their own receipts. I won't pretend I wasn't tempted to post the whole statement online right then and let the town watch the Kessler story collapse under its own arithmetic in real time. I opened the app. I had the photo ready. My thumb hovered over the button for one long, ugly minute while I imagined the comments turning, the vindication landing exactly where I wanted it to. Then I closed it, not because I'm better than the impulse, but because I finally understood the whole shape of the trap. Public shaming was Diane's weapon. The second I used it too, I'd just be another woman shouting her grievance into a town that would file both of us under the same tired story and move on. And the truth would drown in the noise, which is the only place a lie like hers could ever survive. I wanted an audience too. I just wanted the truth to be the one standing under the light, not my temper. 2 days later, the invitation arrived through Evan, which was its own quiet kind of cowardice, a text instead of a call. Mom's doing the Barnes 30th on Saturday, whole family and half our regular customers. She thinks it'd be good if you came, and we finally settled things like adults. I read it 3 times and understood the shape of it a little more each time. Diane wasn't inviting me to make peace. She was building a courtroom and calling it a party. 30 years of Kessler's table, the widow who'd held it together alone, the whole community gathered to honor her. And somewhere in the middle of it, the ungrateful ex-daughter-in-law who owed the family $72,500. Either I stayed away, and my absence confirmed the story, or I showed up and folded, and my folding confirmed it just the same. She'd built a room with no exit. She just never once asked what I might carry into it. I texted back 4 words. "I'll be there, Diane." Then I picked up the 2 clean copies of Marcus's statement from my desk, along with the single page Renata had written for me stating plainly that the invoice had no legal standing whatsoever, slid them into an envelope, and laid out my clothes the night before the way you do for anything that matters. The barn was strung with string lights and warmed by the smell of wood smoke and roasted chicken. Long tables under a banner that read 30 years of Kessler's table. Diane held court at the head of the longest one. When I walked in, I felt the room notice me in a wave, conversations dipping half a beat, the particular hush of a lot of people pretending they hadn't been waiting for exactly this. I found a seat in the middle of the room, not hiding, not charging the front, set my envelope on the table, folded my hands, and waited. Diane rose and tapped her glass, and the room went quiet for her the way rooms do for people who have run them for 30 years. She talked about hollies, about droughts and lean seasons and holding on. She was good at it, her voice catching in all the right places. Then she turned, slow and sorrowful, until she was looking at me, and the whole barn turned with her. "I didn't want to do this here," she said, pitched to Carrie. "But this family believes in handling things honestly in front of the people who matter. I paid for your wedding out of a widow's savings because I believed in you, Claire. When you left my son, you left that debt sitting there like it meant nothing to you." She let it hang. "Family settles its accounts," she finished, and folded her hands and asked, gently, cruelly, in front of everyone, "So when are you going to make it right?" I stood up slowly. I could feel the whole room bracing for tears, for the guilty flush, for the outburst that would prove her right. I gave them none of it. "Thank you, Diane," I said, and my voice came out even. "You're right about one thing, and it's the most important thing. Family does settle its accounts. I believe that too. Something flickered across her face, the first crack, because she'd expected me to argue, and instead I'd agreed. And agreement was the one move she hadn't prepared for. You paid for my wedding, I said, and I won't stand here and pretend you didn't. That was real, and it was generous, and I've never once forgotten it. But since there's an invoice going around and a letter from a paralegal threatening court, I think everyone here deserves to see the whole ledger. Because a debt runs two directions, and I've kept my half of it. I read Renata's letter first, plainly just the heart of it, that the invoice had no legal standing, that it would be dismissed in any courtroom in the state inside 10 minutes. Across the table, Cole Hargrove found something urgent to study on his own shoes. Then I opened Marcus's statement and read it the way you read a verdict, one line at a time. The freezer settlement gap, $19,200. A few people shifted. The truck loan, $14,750. Diane's medical bills after the fall, $11,400. Someone behind me drew a breath. Paige's tuition, I said, and looked at her directly. At the culinary school, $8,300. And Paige went pale, because she was the one who'd written some people take and take. And now the whole room knew exactly who had paid for her second year. I saved the last line, because it was the one I needed them to hear most. When Holly's passed, I said, and my voice held even though his name still cost me something, this family didn't have enough set aside for the funeral. I know, because I'm the one who quietly made up the difference. $5,900. And the roof, the spring the storm took it apart. $16,000, on top of everything the insurance already covered. So let's add it the way Diane wants it added, I said. $75,550. That's what I've paid this family without ever once sending a bill. You billed me for $72,500. I'd already paid $3,050 more than that before your invoice ever reached my counter. By your own math, Diane, this family doesn't owe me an apology. It owes me $3,050. The silence after that was the loudest thing I have ever heard in a room full of people. Almost there. And I do want to know, whether you're new here or you've been with me a while, has someone ever tried to turn your own kindness into a debt you supposedly owed them? Tell me in the comments, because I promise you, you are not the only one who's kept a folder like mine. Diane's composure went all at once, the way a dam doesn't leak before it breaks. How dare you humiliate me at my own family's celebration, she said, her hand slapping the table. This is private business. But the room wasn't with her anymore, and she could feel it. And the more her voice rose, the further the whole barn tilted away from her, because everyone there had just watched the grieving widow's debt turn out to be a bill she'd already been paid twice over. Evan stood then, quiet, and said the only true thing he had left in him. She's right, Mom. Every dollar. Claire covered all of it. He didn't come stand beside me. He said his piece and sat back down and let me stand there alone, which was, in its own way, exactly the marriage all over again. I didn't raise my voice, and that's the part I'm proudest of. I folded Marcus's statement, walked it to the head of the table, and set it down gently beside Diane's untouched plate. Keep the invoice, Diane, I said, quiet enough that the whole room had to still itself to hear me. Consider it paid, with interest, years before you ever asked. I'm not here for the $3,050. I don't want it. I only wanted this town to stop believing I took from a family. I'm the reason still has a roof, and a business, and a daughter with a diploma. She reached for the old authority in her voice and found it wasn't there anymore. "Get out," she finally said, and the word cracked clean in half. I turned and walked toward the doors, and an older woman near the aisle stood and got my coat from the rack before I reached it, the way you do for a friend, not a stranger. Nobody looked at Diane on my way out. That was the loudest verdict of all. I drove home, past the dark fields with the blue binder on the passenger seat, Holly's old note tucked back inside it. And for the first time since a certified envelope landed on my counter, I took one full breath all the way down. I put the binder back on the shelf behind the winter coats, except now I knew exactly what was in it, and exactly what it was worth. The certified letters stopped 2 days later, and that silence was the most honest thing that family had sent me in years. Paige texted an apology I read once and let sit. Evan mailed a check for $3,050, no note, and I never cashed it. Instead, I framed it and hung it on the wall above my desk next to Holly's soft old repair invoice, the debt and the proof, side by side, where I'd see them every morning. Here is what 7 years and one loud night at a barn taught me, and it's the only thing I'll leave you with. Kindness isn't a loan, but the day you stop keeping proof of your own worth is the day you hand somebody else the pen to write your total for you. A claim is just an argument on paper. Keep yours. The better paper always wins. If this one landed for you, share it with someone who needs the reminder that receipts and love were never enemies. And subscribe to Suspense Calm Stories. A new one waits for you every week. I'll see you in the next one.